So what's his name?
Dr. Gabrielle Lyon here with my longtime best friend and mentor, Dr. Donna Lehman. It's been 2 decades and a lot of Botox for me, not him. And today I'm so excited to talk to you about sharing, well, number one, sharing some of our conversations, that this is actually what we do on a daily basis. Feel very bad for my significant other who just listens like, wow, you guys are real nerds. But hey, it's okay. So today we're going to talk about glutamine. And I think right now there's a lot of conversation about glutamine in muscle and why you should take glutamine for muscle health. But actually, that's not true. Glutamine is the most abundant amino acid. And glutamine is excellent for gastrointestinal health because it helps with the enterocytes in terms of their, is it their energy production?
Yeah,
energy.
It's their primary source of energy.
Okay.
Just like we think about glucose as an energy source, the enterocytes use glutamine as their energy source.
And so it's helpful for having a healthy gut lining.
Right. So, it helps produce the mucosa, that layer, the mucus that basically protects the gut. So everything about making the gut lining healthy
is great, but it's not actually good for muscle.
It's good for muscle. The problem is we can't absorb it.
Supplementally, it's not good for muscle.
Yeah.
But glutamine in the body, which the body generates its own glutamine.
Yeah. Muscle actually makes a lot of glutamine. In fact, it's the primary place we get it. So the branch chain amino acids that you and I often talk about, which are metabolized in muscle, when the muscle is using those for energy, it takes the nitrogen off, and that nitrogen then gets put on another molecule called glutamate and makes glutamine. And so glutamine's in a very high concentration. It's like almost 100 to 200 times the level of other amino acids in muscle. So
which is unusual, right?
It's really unusual. It's a huge pool.
Right.
And it's kind of there for acute stress, but the muscle's always making it. It's a fuel for the gut, like we just talked about.
So glutamine is made in the muscle, then goes into systemic circulation,
right,
and can be utilized in systemic circulation.
Right. So what's kind of cool about that is that the gut we were talking about will use it from the diet, which is kind of on one side, but it uses it from the blood, which is coming from muscle from the other side. So the cells use it kind of from inside and outside the body. It kind of, I guess, reflects just how important of a fuel it is for the gut.
And, I actually, in my clinical practice, I do supplement with glutamine for gut health, but not for muscle health and not from that systemic side that you're talking about. Yeah. And it's interesting because the enterocytes, and I don't actually know this answer, how else would they get glutamine? They would have to extract it from the diet. Yeah,
from the diet or from the muscle. That's the only places we really get it. I think it's interesting that if you look in breast milk, if you look in human milk, it's actually quite high in glutamine. But glutamine isn't stable in water solution, so it's not in infant formulas.
Okay.
So in synthetic formulas, it's not there. But in human milk, it's very high, and it's part of gut development.
That's interesting. So in synthetic formulas, they have it, even if it's a dipeptide.
There have been some experiments with that, and I frankly don't really know if it's in any commercial ones at this point. I don't think it is, but I'm not sure of that.
So when we think about glutamine and gut development, breastfed is always better.
Sure. For all kinds of reasons, but glutamine is one of those.
Interesting. And then glutamine for immune cells and immune health, that seems as if it wouldn't be from the diet, right? So that the dietary glutamine only goes into the enterocytes.
Right. So when I look at it, one of the things we know is that higher protein diets are good for immune health. Well, why? Well, higher protein diets give you higher branch chain amino acids, and it gives you higher glutamine production.
Right.
And so a lot of the things that we see were supplements, whether it's glutamine or arginine or even creatine, a lot of those things relate to how much protein's in the diet. The lower the protein diet, the more likely you'll see an effect of a supplement.
That's a really good point. People ask me all the time is, when should you take a protein supplement? And I really think that there's two ways to take it. Number one, if you don't want to eat food, right? If you are a busy mom of two, and I was thinking, do I throw a man-child in there or not? But like a busy mom of two, and don't really have time to cook, run a medical practice, shakes are great. Supplementation is great.
Yeah.
The other way supplementation is fantastic is if you are actually having a low protein diet.
Right. And so I was initially thinking about supplementing a specific amino acid like glutamine or arginine. And so the point is, if you have a higher protein diet, those kinds of supplements aren't very useful.
Right.
But if you have a real low protein diet, then something like a leucine supplement or an arginine supplement might be effective for you.
But you would never supplement leucine alone, would you?
I would never recommend not at least having the 3 branch chain.
Right.
But all of the research basically says, well, what's the benefit of leucine? Well, it triggers protein synthesis, and as soon as you do that, then you need all the amino acids.
Right.
So you just as well eat protein as opposed to paying for an expensive, branched chain amino acid. The only exception to that is, say for example, a hospitalized person who has a very limited capacity of eating, maybe can only get in 15 grams of protein. Adding leucine or branched chain amino acids on top of that can make it look and act like it's a bigger protein meal. So I think that's a reasonable time to consider a supplement.
I think that that's actually great.
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, we were talking about how do you determine which macronutrient you're going to eat. So you start with protein, and then because protein has the potential to be higher in fat, depending on what it's going to be, you account for that first.
Yeah, so so often people want to talk about percentages of calories, but protein is an absolute number. You have to decide how much, and so you start with your protein amount, and then you build the rest of your diet around that.
And it's interesting, though, when you look at, so what do you think about the daily value in terms of percentage? So the daily value is on the back of any food label, right? And it'll give you a percentage of protein. Or it'll give you a percentage of the daily value of protein, for example, if it was...
I'm not sure it actually does it with protein. It does it with vitamins, but I'm not sure that it actually translates on most labels a daily value for protein, which is interesting. I mean, what you'd like it to do is to reflect biological value and protein quality. But most labels don't do that. Most of them don't have a DV for protein on it.
Really?
Yeah.
I was looking at some supplements, and there was 2 supplements. One was a natural supplement. It was a protein powder, and then it was one that actually it's a plant-based protein powder where they added branched chain amino acids.
Okay.
And it nearly doubled the daily value.
Oh, interesting.
But the protein content was the same.
Interesting. The individual amino acids is kind of an interesting thing on labels because they don't count in the calories. So you could put 10 grams of free amino acids into a product, which would be equivalent to 10 grams of protein, which would be 40 calories, and they can ignore it.
How is that possible?
Because it's not required to be accounted for in calories on the label. So
That's crazy.
That's a flaw. 30 years ago, when that was never done, wasn't a problem. But now food companies have the right to put free amino acids in, and they don't count in the calories.
That is so shady.
Yeah, it is. And
so could you add in a free amino acid to a drink, or you could add in?
You could put in 3 grams of free amino acids into a drink and claim it's calorie free.
Gosh. Totally mess. It's a mess. How do you decide what kind of calories, right? So the confusion between protein, carbohydrates, fats, low calorie, high calorie, ketogenic, paleo, it's a total mess.
Yeah, and everybody has their strong opinion about it. And for me, when I think about balancing a diet, the first thing you have to do is decide upon your total calories. So you can have a high fat diet and be perfectly healthy, low carb, and you can have a high carb, low fat and be perfectly healthy. Depends a lot on your metabolism. But as you go to the extremes, then the question also comes your total calories. So you can have a high-fat, low-carb diet that's totally unhealthy if you have too many calories.
Right.
With most keto
Right.
diets, people lower their intake because there's a certain amount of fat you can eat.
The broccoli quota, even though that's not keto, but there's like a
and
quota.
likewise, with the carb, so my always starting point is, are calories in check? If the calories are balanced for you, then I don't really care whether you're high fat or low carb or vice versa, because you can be balanced either way. Then you get into the individual, and certain individuals are more sensitive to carbs. They run high triglycerides, so that person really ought to have a low carb diet. Other people have more problems with blood lipids and may very well be better with different lower lipid diets. So I think you have to get into the individual then. I don't think there's a one size fits all with the debate about carbs and fat.
Can I shift the conversation to something that we were talking about earlier, which I think is super important? We talk about calories in, calories out. And on a very fundamental level, that matters.
Yeah.
But it's not as easy to calculate as this is, I'm a 5'1" woman. Yes, everybody, I'm 5'1", and I weigh 115 pounds, and we could calculate how many calories I need, but there's the calories out also relate to metabolic efficiency of the gut microbiome. There's these other kind of nuances that probably play a role in calories out, and maybe even calories in from extraction of microbiome. But it still comes down to calories in and calories out. But the efficiency of metabolism and the efficiency of use is different. And there's things that play a role.
It has to be a calorie balance issue. People who are overweight are eating more calories than they need. There's no other explanation. But if you took two individuals eating the same calories, one might become obese and the other one won't because of efficiencies. And it's even more fundamental than that. It's just not something an accountant can do. The food data has a fairly high tolerance. Food companies can be 10 to 15% off. So what's on the label doesn't necessarily reflect the actual calories. So now you've got that problem. And then, as you said, now we've got all the efficiency issues. Gut microbiome, certain kinds of things that are lost in the stool, and certain kinds of things can be digested. We didn't think fiber could be used as energy. We now know it can be.
That's right.
How you distribute protein through the day can affect your thermic effect of food.
I want to talk about that too.
And so, we think that's a big deal. So then there's the amount of muscle mass that makes an impact on your energy expenditure. The amount, how you exercise. So there's lots and lots of factors that determine your efficiency versus my efficiency. And so while calories matter, it's hard to be an accountant and actually come up with a number.
I think, what I think the best way to manage that is, and you and I actually think differently on this. I think tracking your calories over a 2-week period of time to actually see what it is that you're eating.
Sure.
So for me and my patients, we use Cronometer, and they can we track it for 2 weeks, and then we start to reduce it. So if they're weight neutral and they're eating weight maintenance, we start to reduce it by 250 calories, 500 calories, and then see, kind of what happens. So we find their calorie range.
Yeah. And we both agree it's a calorie issue, and you have to kind of find their calorie issue.
Right.
And so some people will work with it as a calorie number. We found that didn't work with most people. So the way we did it was a little different. We started out with sort of a meal design of certain number of calories, say 1,600 calories, but it was in a meal design. We had certain portion sizes we taught people to understand. They could look at their plate and say, that's a cup of something, and portion sizes, which is the way people eat. And so we taught them to do that, and then if they were losing the right amount of weight, we'd leave them there. If they weren't, we'd reduce it down.
Right.
So we taught them to do it with portions without ever having to do the math. And most people don't like math tests, so we went with visual cues instead. So again, we're both looking for how can a individual manage their calories and what's the easiest way to make it a lifestyle. And most people aren't very interested in counting calories as a lifestyle.
I do like the idea of lifestyle medicine and lifestyle changes, and what does that really encompass?
Yeah. I mean, people go out to restaurants. We know that people eat at least 50% of their food out of their own kitchen. Maybe not during COVID, but in general, they're eating. And so they need to be able to recognize it. They can't always count the calories because they don't know how many calories was in that dish. But if they can visualize the portion size, then they can kind of think it through.
Yeah.
And we found that was functional for, we had over 250 people in our weight loss clinic, and that's what we found was most effective.
I think that's very interesting, and we're going to find two groups of people, more than two groups of people. You're going to find some people that just want to do it that way, and some people that really like to track the data. Which
and I think that's a message in nutrition that people don't get, is that just like a few minutes ago, some people want low carb, some people want high carb. Some people want to track calories, some people can't do that. And some people want to exercise. So you're going to have to try and fit it. You can't fit every person into the same square hole or round peg or whatever. It just doesn't work. So, I think as a physician, as somebody who works with individuals, you have to find what works for the person you're talking to.
Yes, I totally agree. And while I have you here, I would love to talk a little bit about the gut microbiome and the recent paper that you published in, was it Nature? Nature
Communications, yeah. One of the Nature journals.
Yeah, that was really low level thinking there. In case you guys don't know, Nature it's like the Super Bowl of journals. Do you want to share a little bit about where you came up with it, a little bit about the study? And
so for a long time I always wondered, because I'm a protein person and I think that the RDA is a real very minimum type of protein intake, but if you look at the average vegetarian who's really following a good diet, their protein intake's really low. And I kept wondering why they didn't show any protein deficiencies.
Right,
I mean,
it's unusual.
It just seems like they ought to. And so I finally decided, I wonder if the fact that they're eating a lot of fiber, if it's changing the gut microbiome in a way that in essence, they're kind of turning their gut into more like a cow or a sheep, a ruminant animal, because the ruminant gut, because of the microbiome, the bacteria there can actually extract nitrogen and reuse it in a much more efficient way. So we in fact designed that experiment with rodents, and we basically tested that, and we lowered the protein intake down to a very low level. The animals were beginning to show very weak signs of protein deficiency, some biomarkers that are an integrated stress response. It's beginning to show the stress. And so we then fed them different levels and different kinds of fibers, and we showed that with the right amounts and the right combination, we could sort of correct the deficiency. And when we looked into the intestine, we saw certain lines of bacteria would flourish with that kind of fiber, and they were very similar to what are in the stomach or in the GI tract of a cow. So in fact, we found bacteria that were efficient at actually synthesizing lysine and methionine that are actually deficient in most plant foods. So we kind of proof of concept with rodents that one of the things that may protect vegetarian is their guts actually adapt to it.
So interesting. Do you think it's going to change what we know about the idea of essential amino acids?
Yeah, I don't know. It's going to be, this was it's a recent thing where everybody is studying the gut microbiome. We were kind of scratching the surface on that. So I think we're going to see in the next decade a lot of gut microbiome research, and I don't know how it's going to unfold. I think my personal opinion is we're going to learn a lot. We're going to see a lot of interesting findings, but we're going to find that it's such a robust system that it protects us from the exterior environment that it's not really going to sort of be revolutionizing everything we know about health. I think it's going to
You're
add to our
probably right.
knowledge, but we're still going to be asking the same questions.
Okay. So we're not going to have a whole new understanding of essential.
I don't think so.
Yeah,
You know,
okay, good.
the reality is the bugs can learn to scavenge better, but there's still a certain level of protein you have to have.
Right.
They can't invent nitrogen. That's a fundamental chemical in life, and so you have to have a certain amount of it. But what it may mean is they can scavenge it from different parts of the diet, different kinds of food, and so that's kind of an interesting finding.
Very, very cool. Anyway, I'm so glad you're here.
It's great to be able to
It's
sit
been-
down
I
and
know,
do
it's
it in
been too
person
long. It's the
versus
first-
just over Zooms.
This is the first time we actually haven't seen each other, you know, multiple times a year.
For at least 2.5 years.
I know, so crazy.
Oh, it's
Well,
great.
Very exciting. Okay. All right, guys, if you like this video, you know what to do. Like it, subscribe, the whole 9, maybe 10.